Hi there! Welcome to my very first episode of the Functional Cantina. I am so grateful you're here. I'm so excited you're here. And most importantly, I'm excited that I'm finally here. But before we go any further, I want to definitely briefly introduce myself. My name is Kandice. I'm a wife, a mom, and a stepmom. I'm also the proud founder of Cantina, a booze-free bottle shop and eventually tap room that's rooted in harm reduction, nervous system support, and giving people safer options than alcohol. Excuse me. But before that, I'm someone whose family has been deeply shaped by alcohol. Not through addiction in my own life, but through its consequences. And that lens has been really speaking to me recently. And that is the lens I'm speaking to you from today. This podcast is something I've carried quietly for such a long time. It's my open journal. It's a place for honest conversations about alcohol, about what it promises us, what it definitely takes from us, and what it normalizes, and what it quietly costs. So I decided to begin this podcast with the real reason behind everything that I'm doing. My booze-free journey, my lifestyle shift, and why I built and am building Cantina. Because as all you small business owners know, you never keep building. It just keeps going. And I want to be clear about this the right way. This isn't a small reason. It isn't I just want to be healthier story, although some of it is. And it definitely isn't a trend or a phase. This is a movement. This is me now. This is something much deeper. Something heavy. And something that shaped my family long before I ever became part of it. And today, I want to share that story with you. So before we go any further, there's something important I want you to understand. This shift didn't happen overnight for me. I didn't walk away from alcohol immediately. I didn't wake up one day and decide I was done, although it kind of did. And in fact, I didn't fully step away until fairly recently. August 23rd of 2025 was the last time I had an alcoholic beverage. That was my birthday. And we'll talk about that on another day. But what happened instead was slower, and it was much quieter. Excuse me, I am having something to drink as I talk to you all. So years ago, 1999 to be exact, my husband went through an experience that planted a seed. And although at that time he didn't know it, I wasn't involved in the picture. We just didn't know. But looking back at it now, that moment marked the beginning of a very long internal journey. One that's not over. And one that would eventually lead me here, having this conversation with you. The Functional Cantina exists because there aren't enough honest spaces to talk about alcohol without extremes. Now, I'm not here to bash alcohol and those who drink alcohol. This is not that. This isn't about labels. This definitely isn't about perfection, because I am not perfect by any means. Although sometimes I like to think I am, but I'm not. It isn't about telling anyone what they should or shouldn't do. This is just me. My thoughts, my opinions. It's about curiosity. It's about harm reduction. It's about asking better questions. And my hope is that somewhere in these conversations, you feel less alone. That is definitely what I need. And I'm sure I'm not the only one. Or perhaps you hear something that helps you pause. Or you realize there are more options than you've been led to believe. Oh, let me tell you. This one. We definitely have been led to believe something about alcohol. So, the night that changed everything. Before I ever met my husband, before we built a beautiful life together, before we had our children, before we got married, before all the things, something happened that would follow him for the rest of his life. Nearly 26 years ago, my husband was involved in a catastrophic car accident caused by a drunk driver. He was hit head on. He was severely injured. Emergency crews had to use the jaws of life to cut him out of the vehicle. His body absorbed an impact no one is ever prepared for. What followed were days that turned into weeks, and weeks that turned into months in the hospital. Multiple surgeries, pins and rods placed throughout his body, a long, painful recovery that didn't end when he was discharged. And while he survived, life never simply went back to normal. And I don't know if it ever will. It's been 26 years. And the impact of that accident has really, excuse my language, has really fucked with his head. The injuries changed how he moved through the world, and it changes how he moves through the world. He has pins and rods in his ankle. He has a lifelong reminder across his stomach. He does not have a belly button anymore. Something that we don't even bat an eye at. We take for granted our belly button. He doesn't have that because they had to cut through it. These injuries have shaped his physical limitations. They influenced his pain, his endurance, and his resilience. Because let me tell you, my husband is the most resilient man I have ever met. And even now, decades later, that night still shows up. In his body, like I said, in old injuries that flare up, in the way certain movements still live close to the surface. There are times that we want to go roller skating, rollerblading, And although he will put on a happy face, it definitely does hurt his ankle. When the weather changes, he's the first to let us know. And when he shares pieces of that experience with me, I can hear how deeply it marked him. Not just physically, but most importantly, emotionally. Trauma doesn't stay neatly in the past. It travels with you. It shapes how you view safety, risk, and survival. That night didn't end when the crash did. It became part of who he is. And when I married him, it became part of our life together too. So that is why I say that this became part of me long before I ever knew it would. This all happened before I knew him. I wasn't there. I didn't live through it. But when you marry someone, you definitely inherit parts of their history. The joyful parts, and unfortunately, the painful ones. So even though I didn't experience that night firsthand, I live with its effects every day. I live with the injuries that still surface. I live with the emotional weight he carries quietly, because let me tell you, contrary to popular belief, he carries this very quietly. I live with the way certain memories change the room when they came up. And eventually, I realized something too. Our children are living with this too. There are gaps in their story, questions they will one day ask, absences that didn't come from choice, but from circumstance. And I will get to that later on another day. When you become a parent, you feel loss differently. You feel it protectively. You feel it in the questions you prepare for, in the conversations you know are coming or will come. And because I am their mother, this story belongs to me too now. This became my story the moment I became part of my husband's life. And so let me say this again a little quickly, because we kind of blaze over it and don't emphasize on it. My husband was involved in a catastrophic car accident that was caused by a drunk driver. My husband was hit head on. There are so many emotions that run through our head when we talk about this, when we mention it. We don't talk about it very often, and probably not as often as we should, only because I think it's important that we bring awareness. This happened to my husband. It's never going away. If we could turn back time, it would, but we can't. But it's very painful for my husband to talk about it. So I think well, I don't think. He has given me trying to figure out how to say this. I'm honored to be able to share his story that he's allowed me to share. And every time I think about this, I think about everything that happened that night. I think about the various results that happened that night. And I think about the what ifs. There are so many what ifs. But one thing that keeps playing in my head over and over is that we're very good at naming the problem. Drunk driving is bad. Alcohol ruins lives. People need to be more responsible. All of that is very true. And I want to be clear, I do not excuse or minimize the damage alcohol can cause. But I also sit with the question that doesn't get asked enough. We present a problem, but rarely present solutions. And so I sit there and think, what if people had other tools? What if this man had other tools that night? What if alcohol wasn't the default? What if it wasn't the expectation? What if it wasn't the only socially acceptable way to cope, celebrate, or unwind? What if he had something different? I'm not saying different options would have changed that night, but I'm pretty positive it would have. What I am saying is that people make different choices when they have different options. And right now, I don't feel many people feel like they have any options. And so that's where compassion comes in. That's where harm reduction matters. And that's where this conversation begins. Now let me get something clear. I do not condone the actions that this man made. I don't justify them. And I feel very strongly that consequences should have been faced. I also want to say something very clearly and respectfully. I have deep respect for people in recovery, for people who have lived inside the addiction, fought their way out, rebuilt their lives, and now help others. Their stories matter. Their insight matters. And I have been honored to meet so many people who have fought their way out of this horrible addiction. And I've been so honored to come across people's story, although I may not have met them in real life, but I feel like I have, whether it be through their social media, through books, through research that I have done. It really is amazing. And it really does open your eyes like, wow, that's got to be tough as shit. But I'm so proud of each and every one of them. I'm so proud of each and every one of you. But I also want to be honest about where I'm coming from. I'm not an alcoholic, although I do have past stories where alcohol did cause some problems in my life, in me personally. I'm not in recovery, and I'm not telling this story from inside addiction. I'm telling it from the other side. From the perspective of someone who married into alcohol's consequences. And I'll be honest, that feels very vulnerable to say out loud, and quite frankly, it scares the shit out of me. Because people might ask, what right does she have to talk about alcohol? And here's my answer. We don't talk enough about the families that have been shaped by alcohol. We don't talk about secondhand grief. We don't talk about the fear, the anger, the protectiveness, the confusion. So I'm here to add that voice. Not as an expert, not with all the answers, but as someone living in the aftermath. Someone with an open mind, and someone that understands that not everyone is perfect. My husband's story is the foundation of my mission. But like I said before, alcohol has affected my life too. So this episode is about the root. But as this podcast continues, I'll share more personal layers. The subtle ways alcohol impacted my self-esteem. The moments when drinking stopped feeling fun. When I started numbing instead of helping. The exhaustion, the guilt, the quiet frustration. Eventually, choosing a booze-free life felt less restriction and more like alignment. And that choice opened the door to exploring alternatives. Because let's face it, sometimes staying completely out of the picture isn't always what we need, what we want. I still want to socially go out and have a fun night, have a fun afternoon, a fun brunch without alcohol. I have not been able to find very many of those places, those events, those things to do. So, as I mentioned, it opened the door to exploring alternatives. And as we step out and look at the bigger picture of things and why I feel that this moment matters and why I feel like I have to share my voice, is because there is so much government regulation getting involved with alcohol alternatives. And I will save my rant for why I think there is so much pushback. But right now, There is talk about rescheduling marijuana from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3, which is a good thing, kind of. But like I said, we will get to that some other day. And the landscape for hemp-based botanicals is shifting very quickly. Regulations are tightening. Conversations are getting very loud. And access to regulated, safer alternatives is becoming less certain. And when options disappear, people don't stop coping. Guess what? They go back to what's familiar. And for many, that's alcohol. That's why this conversation matters now. Not that it didn't matter then, because oh boy, it sure did. But I'm starting to open my eyes and realize very many things. This isn't just personal healing for me. It's education. I love reading, and I definitely can get down a rabbit hole if you don't pull me back out. It's advocacy. It's about making sure people know that there are other ways to unwind, to regulate, and connect. And that belief is what led me to kava, functional mushrooms, hemp-based beverages, kratom, electrolytes, cacao, and the list goes on. Kana, Damiana, Blue Lotus. Okay, like I said, I can keep going. But these are functional, natural, botanical plants that help our nervous system. And so eventually, Kava Cantina. This podcast is real, and it's new for me. I'm learning as I go. I have never done this in my life. The mic, the pacing, the storytelling, all new. So, I'm asking for a little patience. My goal is to keep this going long term. Not as a trend, but as a space where we can feel comfortable talking about alcohol honestly and without shame from whichever side you're on. Whether you're going through your sober journey, whether you're sober curious, whether you just want to cut down on alcohol here and there, or whether you're like me, facing the consequences that alcohol has caused. Over time, you'll hear more personal stories, the emotional weight alcohol leaves behind, what healing actually looks like, the challenges, the shifts, the wins, and all the human parts in between. There is more to our story. And I'm so honored to share it with you. I hope this podcast makes you feel seen, heard, and validated. Thank you for being here for my very first episode. Thank you for holding space for a story that is so heavy, personal, and super important. If this resonates with you, please stay with me. Subscribe, share, join the conversation for sure. And if you'd like to stay connected beyond the podcast, I invite you to join the Kava Cantina email list. Although that is a work in progress, I still invite you to join. That's where I plan on sharing podcast drops, new products, local updates, events, and what's next for Kava Cantina in San Antonio. I'll see you in episode 2. I can't tell you when that will happen. Let's be real. But we'll talk about more directly about alcohol has affected our life and how that shaped the mission I'm on today. Until then, please take very good care of yourself. And thank you for being here.